It's something that I consider essentially important, and also that I consider the final hurdle for a photographer, if you ask me, is light.
Yeah, it is.
A photograph has to have and use interesting light. Now, sometimes that light can be dead flat. Completely flat, very little tonality, and if you use that to make that kind of photograph, and that's what you intend, that's great. There's all different kinds of light. But when you make a photograph, the first thing you have to consider is, what am I doing with the light? I will be honest with you now, as the older I get, and the more I've seen lots of subjects, and I've composed things millions of different ways, the thing that is most likely to make me drive my car off the side of the road and stop for a photograph is cool looking light. And then I'll look around and say, all right, I got this great light, what can I take a picture of? I don't care, I'll find something. Subjects are everywhere. But if the light's good, that's what's going to make a good photograph. And so, as a photographer, you have to constantly be looking for light. Now, sometimes though, you find the subject first. And you have a truly interesting subject. And the light is not spectacular. And it's not particularly interesting. Then the challenge is, what do I do with this picture? Is the light better from this angle? If I come over here, will the light be more interesting here? How can I exploit the light I have to make this photograph interesting? But you have to consider the light. You can as a photographer, one of the things you can almost always do, I say almost because not always, but you can almost always change your relationship to the light. It's one of the things that makes a photographer a photographer. If it's a bright day out there and everything's flat and the sky is awful, those skies we get plenty of in northern Michigan, you can change your relationship to that sky by pulling your camera back so you have something blocking that sky. Get yourself under something so that you don't have to see that sky. And that sounds like a compositional choice, but in fact, it's a one frequently made by photographers because of the light that they're stuck with. Because if you have a bright, flat, ugly sky and a subject down here that's not as bright, I can make that subject look more bright by getting rid of that sky. And frequently I can do it with organic elements. I don't have to cheat. I don't have to use something artificial. I can just do it by carefully positioning my camera. Again, this is where tripod's nice. Okay, there are just so we can be clear on this, if you haven't really thought about light, and I think light is really important. I teach a 3-hour class called Light. To give you an idea, I'm going to condense that down now to about 2 minutes. But there's so much to be said about it. But there are essentially 4 types of light. There's direct light, which is the sun with nothing in front of it. There's filtered light, which is the sun coming through clouds, or light coming through a dirty window, or any of the other things that make for sometimes very interesting light. There's diffused light, the classic, of course, being the classic artificial diffused light being a softbox. But a lampshade is also a diffuser that creates diffused light. There's all kinds of things that make diffused light. And then there's reflected light, the cool light that comes off the side of an old barn that has its own unique color and texture because it's hitting a unique surface. And the surface of the thing that's doing the reflecting will often make the light interesting. One of my favorite things to do when I'm photographing a human being, if the light is really bad and uninteresting, is to find something big that's reflecting some light. Building, usually it's buildings that I look for, but every now and then you can even find a beach that's reflecting light, and then get your subject in different light than what's reflecting off of there, and get that reflection to be the lighting that you're using. And again, There's no right or wrong answer for this. The answer is intention. Did you look for light? Did you do what you can to find the best light and often to control the light? I'm sure some of you carry small or large reflectors to move a little bit of light around. Just to, you working on a flower or something and it's got not quite what you want, you pop out your little disc reflector. I always have one. You give it a little bit of that and you know that's reflected light. I also forever, I can't tell you the number of times I've been taking a photograph and I've picked up a tree branch and held it up with one hand while I'm making the photograph with the other because the background is too light and I want a little texture and I want a little shadow back there, and I do it with a tree branch that I found on the ground. That's controlling light. And that's perfectly legitimate. And it's your responsibility as a photographer to consider those things. When you look at that photograph and say, all right, the light isn't the way I want it. How am I going to change the light?